Hey folks, we're going to talk about classes and objects. I'm going to give you some examples here that you can use moving forward. We're talking about the base information regarding object-oriented programming. And so we're going to focus on what is a class, what is an object, and how to use them. We're also going to talk about fields and properties. All right, so in this code here, I've got some classes. I've renamed the main class to Power Rangers Go. Inside of that class, I have one member, and that is this function here, the main function. And so you could call this Power Rangers Go class the driver class. So when I run the program, the compiler will find this main class and it will begin running the code here. So line 8. Alright, and then if we take a look at the output, here, you can see what this is doing. It's printing out the text here. And then I'm creating an object, changing a property. So let's talk about that. I've created an additional class here, and it's important that you put your classes, don't put your classes inside of each other. So here, this class closes before I start my new one. So I'm going to minimize this as a feature on Replit here, and a lot of programming text editors. So I don't need to work with that stuff right now. I want to work with this class, the Zord class. Okay, so inside of a class, you will list your fields and properties first. And these are kind of like variables that are attached to an object created from this class. And so here I have this is a field, and fields, the names start with lowercase letters. Generally they're private, so that you can only access them within the class. And it's just like declaring a variable. You give it the data type. All right. When we talk about methods, we will talk more about fields. All right. So you know how to set it. This is how you set it up. I'm setting a default value of 1 here. I'm not using this. I just wanted to show you how to set that up. Okay. Properties are also like variables, but here's how you set that up. So properties are generally public. So we want to set that. That way we can access them outside of the class. And so we're going to access this property inside of our Power Rangers Go class to change the value and access the value. All right. This is part of the property right here. This is shorthand for setting up a default get and set method for changing and accessing the value. So the get, by putting get here, I can access the value stored in color by referencing the property name outside of this class. And I can change the value because I put set here. So because I set this up 27 to 31 like this, public data type name, and then within your curly braces you put get set. I wanted to show you here's what it would look like properly indented, but you'll most likely see it like this to take up less space. All right. And so you can see now that I have this class set up with a field and a property, let's take a look at how do I actually use this class. And when you create a class, you're actually creating a new type. So if I want to create a Zord object, the variable I'm going to use to store that needs to be of the Zord type. So right here on line 10, I got a note here, creating an object from the class. So just like declaring a variable, here's my type of Zord. It's going to be the same name as the class. And here's my identifier or name. Since this is a local variable to the main method, I give it a lowercase. I start the name with a lowercase letter. And then I'm assigning a new Zord object. So when you see the keyword new, that tells the computer to reserve space in memory to hold the object, which includes all of its members, fields, properties, methods. And so here we're telling it which object to create. This is actually a method. It's called a constructor method. And each class you create, each non-static class you create will have a constructor method. We haven't specified that in the class, so it defaults to a blank constructor method. So the constructor methods are always the name of the class, okay? And then we don't need any arguments, so we put the empty parentheses. And so on line 10, what we're doing is we're creating a new variable called myZord that can hold a reference to a Zord object, okay? And we're creating a new Zord object and then assigning the reference to that into the variable. So I can now access this new object by using the name. So down here on line 12, I got a note here, changing the value stored in the color property. Okay, so Zords have a color property. So every time I create a new Zord, it has its own color property. You can think of it kind of like a variable. And since I have this as a property with a get and set, I can change the value by simply assigning it. So I reference the property I want. It's inside of the myZord object dot color property. So remember, the dot allows you to access the sub members of the class, technically of the object, but they're defined in the class. So when I do myZord.color, it's going to look down here and say, okay, what is that? Well, it's a property that has the ability to retrieve the data or change it. So when I assign this string of chartreuse, the object reference stored in myZord will go in and change the color property to the value of this string. Okay, and remember, I set the property as the string data type, so I can only store a string in there. Alright, so I can change it. I can also access it. So down here I'm accessing the value. I'm using an interpolated string to print out this message. Bimmy Lasterson, when I play my magic flute, a chartreuse Zord appears. And so here where I'm accessing that property, again, I just used the name. Which object do I want? And what property do I want? All right. We can create additional objects. So let's create another Zord. We'll call this my second Zord. And we'll create a new Zord object from the Zord class. Let's change the color of that one to burgundy. And we'll come up with another name here. Kellerson. Okay. Change the message here. And change the object reference variable. All right, and we'll put a little blank line here so we can see this better. And so now we have two objects created when the program runs. They have different colors, and we can use those objects independently of each other. As you can see here, I have those two variables. All right. I do want to talk about these object references. So I'm talking about line 10 here. And line 19. First object. Second object. All right. So on line 11, I create this. This variable holds a reference, the actual location in memory where this object is stored. So, you can think about it as, okay, this is the object, but that's not entirely true. All right, it's just a reference to the object. I can have multiple references to the same object. I'll call this my Zord reference 2. Okay, and I want this to be a reference to the object I created on line 11. So I don't need to create a new object. I can just say, okay, take the object from the my Zord reference and stick it in this other reference. All right, and so down here where I'm using my Zord.color, I could use the other reference. Now, I'm not talking about why you would do this yet, because we don't have enough information to put it together. So you just have to trust me that this will all come together in the end. You really need to know what these things are called and how they work to understand object-oriented programming. Then when we work on larger solutions, it'll start to make sense, and I will go into detail about why you would do these things. For now, you just need to be able to recognize them and use them with proper syntax. Okay. And then down here, we're creating the other Zord. Well, let's see if this works first. So it should just print the same thing. Always go slow when I'm in a hurry. Well, we'll just let that take its time, I guess, because I want to show you one thing with references that is very important to understand. And I keep saying it, but this variable we create, all it stores is a reference to whatever object you give it. So when we create a new object in memory, in the computer's memory, so where everything is stored that we are using in the program, it will reserve space to hold all of the values for that object. And then what gets stored in this variable is just the address. So if we ever need to use those values, we can use this name as the address to that spot in memory, and then it will return whatever we ask or use whatever method we want using the data stored in that object. Okay, so let's take a look at, what about if I set here, well, I guess I've already got this. I've already got this going. So take a look at line 11. I have this variable. Okay, and then here I've created this variable, and I've copied the reference from myZord into there. So myZord reference 2, and we're printing that, the color property, from this object reference. Okay, where is that color coming from? Where are we changing that color? Well, on line 15, we're changing myZord.color to chartreuse, and we're accessing myZord reference 2.color to print it out. How does it know that it's chartreuse? Because we're not printing out myZord.color, we're printing out myZord reference 2.color. Okay, that's because myZord and myZord reference 2 have the exact same value. So if I change either of those at this point, they'll both follow whatever value I've changed. So as soon as I did myZord.color, all I did was change the value of the property of that object to chartreuse. So any reference to that one object, which, you know, lines 11 and 12 are the references to that one object, they'll both always pull the same information. All right, so if I do this here, I'll test you. myZord, actually I'll do this beforehand. myZord reference 2 equals yellow. I ran out of weird color names. Okay. What's it going to print out here? I'm setting myZord reference 2, .color to yellow, and then I'm setting myZord.color to chartreuse. What value is going to print out here? Let's see. It's still chartreuse. So what's happening is on line 15, the computer looks at myZord reference 2, it finds, okay, that's the object created here, the reference to that object, go inside, find the color property, and then assign the value of this string literal yellow. Okay, and then on line 16, it's saying, okay, find the reference, look at the reference in here and find that object. It's the same object, the same one object that these are both referencing. Find its color property and change it to chartreuse. So we're immediately overriding yellow with chartreuse here. That's why if we use myZord reference 2.color, it's going to show chartreuse. If we do myZord, what color is it going to show? Chartreuse. All right, so understanding what is stored in a variable created with a type that you created from a class, that's called an object. So I created the class here of Zord, and here I'm creating the object, but what gets stored in the variable is just a reference to that object. And you can have as many references as you want to an object. Let's do something where we create another class. Let's create another class so you can see that process. All right, so we'll do class Megazord. Okay. Now I want to list my fields and properties. I'm not going to include any fields here, but let's add some properties. So I'll do public. You can store objects within other objects. So I'm actually going to have this. We'll call this first. Whoops, it's a property, so start with capital. First Zord. Second Zord. Third Zord. I don't think I think I've said chartreuse and Zord more times in this video than in my entire life, by the way. So, okay. And then don't forget we want to be able to get and set those. So we add this. And since you're putting it in a code block here, just like an if statement, you don't need to put the semicolon at the end, right? Because like here where we're closing the Megazord class, we don't put a semicolon there. So you don't need to put it at the end of this code block. Okay. I remember I had this before. What this would look like is like this. But that takes up a bunch of extra lines, so let's not do that. We'll have it this way. It's the same thing, but you can see this is a lot smaller. Okay, so now we have a class of Megazord. It can hold 3 Zords. Okay, so I guess some context here. Megazords are giant robots that are made of smaller robots called Zords. We'll go ahead and give it a name too, because I don't know. I want to give it a name. Okay. Now that we have this class, we can set it up. Up here, we need to create the object. So what type is it going to be? So we look at the class. It's the name of the class, right? So Megazord. That's the type of the variable. Let's call it my Megazord. Okay, and then we want to create a new Megazord object to store in this variable. And I'm just going to say that, but do keep in mind, we're not actually storing the object in that variable. We're storing the reference to that object. All right. It's probably extremely confusing. Just keep saying it to yourself every time you create a new object, that you're storing the reference to that object. Okay. So we use the default built-in constructor for a class where we haven't defined any constructors, which is just the name of the class with empty parentheses. So now we have one Megazord object. And let's give it some Zords. You know, I've only created 2 Zords, so I'm just going to have 2. This is a small Megazord. Alright, so I can change the, I want to set the name, the first Zord, and the second Zord. So how do I do that? I need to access the object through the reference we created. And let me follow the proper naming convention here. You know, okay. Okay. It's not a capital Z there. You guys love watching me fix mistakes here. Oh well. Play the video on 1.5 times speed or 2 times speed if you want to absorb things faster, and you can pause it when you need to think or slow it down. Useful feature on YouTube. So we'll call this Robo Man. Alright, and then we want to set the first Zord equal to what? What is the data type of first Zord? It needs to be a Zord, so I need to pass in, I either need to create a new Zord, or Now I remember why I had a third Zord. Create a new Zord or pass in a reference to an existing Zord here. Okay. So we have my Zord and my second Zord. We can use those for the first two. Cheat a bit here, copy paste. All right. And now I want to show you creating a new one. Put that separate here. I mean, it's not that surprising. So there, we're accessing this object, my Megazord, and then we're accessing the Zord object within Megazord. We're adding the new Zord here. And then we need to give it a color. My Megazord dot third Zord dot color. So we're saying inside of this Megazord object, find the Zord object, and then the color property of that Zord object that's within this Megazord object. And so you can see the dots are just showing, okay, I'm going down a level into this, and then going down into the sub-item of this. The dots are for accessing the sub-items. So the sub-item of this object is this that we want to access, and the property that we want to access is called color. All right. And we'll put Paisley. Is that a color or is that a pattern? I don't know. We'll Google it. I'll Google it off the video here. Okay. And now we'll make a little message here accessing all of that information. Alrighty. You can speed it up for this part. Okay. What was the name of the guy? Crap, I can't remember. Zordon. There we go. That's the guy in the tube from Power Rangers. Okay. Power Rangers. Combine your Zords. I don't know, it's not a proper name. Okay, well, let's just call it follow consisting. Okay. Power Rangers, combine your Zords to form. Oh, and I want to make, yeah, it's an interpolated string, so I can now do my Megazord dot name. Combine your Zords to form yada yada, including the, and we can just grab it from right up here. Boop, boop, boop. Including the including the my Megazord dot first Zord dot color. Oops. I don't think they're going to let me write an episode of Power Rangers here. Well, maybe. I don't know what the standards are on that. Okay. Zord. Oh, where did the third one go? Oh, it's down there. Okay. And if you're not using interpolated strings and you're doing string concatenation, it's good to know string concatenation, but you can see how much cleaner it is if you use string interpolation instead of string concatenation. There's a lot less characters needed in the code, much easier to read, less space taken up. Oh, forgot to access the property. Oh, that's right. Sword dot color. Get rid of this. All right. Let's see if I forgot anything. Okay, Megazord cannot be found. Oh, right, because I changed it. But I forgot to update it here. All right, ignore that. All right, here we go. Okay, so here's our final script. Bimmy Lasterson, when I play my magic flute, a chartreuse Zord appears. Kelly Kellerson, when I play my enchanted theremin, a burgundy Zord appears. Zordon says, Power Rangers, combine your Zords to form Robo-Man, including the Chartreuse Zord, Burgundy Zord, and the Paisley Zord. There we go. Alright, so messing around with classes, creating some objects, messing around with properties, all of this stuff you need to know like the back of your hand moving forward, because this is critical to using classes. So I'm going to make another video here showing you some static classes, and I don't know what I'm talking about now. I'll just put it in the video. Okay, thank you, and see you soon.